Chapter 9. At first, he thought they were just gone, perhaps back to a town for some reason, although he knew they hated cities as much as he did. But no dogs barked to greet him, and there was no noise at the island, no sound, not even birds singing. By the time he pulled the canoe up on shore next to one of their canoes, a thick glass-hulled 18-footer, he knew something was wrong. As he pulled in, the dog jumped from the canoe onto land, but did not leave him, did not run up the shore. She stood near him, pressing against his leg, while he tied the canoe to a limb. He took his bow and put his quiver over his back and knocked a broadhead into the string, and thought, all right, crazy as this is, I'll just take the teasing if they see me walk up already. From the beach where their canoe had been tied, a track curved up for about 50 yards to a camp area, and he could see they had constructed a cabin about 15 feet square, with unpeeled logs and a tarp for a roof pulled over a ridgepole to make it peak and drain off water. But no people. All right, they were gone. That was too bad. But they would come back, and the door to the cabin was open. It was made of 3 rough planks chopped from soft pine and hung on leather hinges. He could see that much when he was 20 yards from the cabin, but it stood open, and they would not have left the door open that way. The dog stopped, her nostrils flared, and all the hair on her back went up in a thick ridge, and she growled in a low, steady rumble. Brian put his 3 pulling fingers on the bow string, ready to draw and release, and move closer to the cabin. Then the smell hit him. Not smoke, not wood smoke, but the smell of blood. Musty, rotten smell of spoiled blood and flesh. He stopped again, flaring his nostrils, taking the offensive odor in, trying to see all around and up and down at the same time, holding his mouth open and his breath to hear better. And that was when he heard the sound of flies. All right, he thought, all right. They left some meat here, and something broke into the cabin and got at it and let the flies in. And it was all wrong, so wrong. He had never felt anything so powerfully wrong in his life, and everything in him wanted to run, get away from this place. But he knew he had to go on into the cabin. He stood to the side of the door, 18 feet away. Anybody in there? Then to the woods, more loudly. Is there anybody here? Nothing, just the continued buzzing of flies, no other sound. And he stood another second and a half, nervously fingering the bowstring. Then he took a deep breath, held it, and stepped into the cabin. There were no windows. The only light came through the doorway, and from a dim glow that worked down through the tarp roof. And for moments he stood inside the doorway, virtually blind in the sudden darkness. Then he stood aside and let the light in, and at the same time his eyes became accustomed to the darkness. My God. The words slipped out without his knowing or caring. It looked like a bomb had gone off inside the cabin. Sacks, boxes, sleeping bags, bunks, snares, traps, and provisions were torn open, thrown everywhere, ripped open, and flung in piles, like so much garbage. But no people, so they had gone somewhere, maybe in the plain, and probably a bear had gotten into the cabin, and indeed, he saw slash marks on the sack of flour that could have come from a bear's claw, and torn into everything. But no, that was too easy. There was more, and part of him knew it. He knew there had to be more, though he didn't want to admit it, and he saw then what he had missed at first. The flies. There was the buzzing of flies everywhere, but the sound was deceptive because the flies were all back in a corner, where torn sleeping bags covered something. Brian moved to the corner, and with no breath left now, only fear. He reached for a corner of the torn sleeping bag and pulled it away, and saw the body, a human body doubled up and jammed back into the corner, covered, and it was Kay Godash's father's. David, destroyed, face torn, neck torn open, one arm ripped in half off the body, stomach turned open. Arr! Brian turned and instantly vomited, and almost hitting the dog, which had followed him into the cabin, growling openly, but crying and whining as well, looking at the dead man. Oh my, oh my, oh my. He couldn't think, he couldn't react, couldn't do anything except stand and throw up and try to make what he had seen not exist. It couldn't be. It just actually be, not this terrible thing. But he turned back and David was still there. And a cloud of flies in a part of Brian's brain went on automatic, and saw things he could not stand to look at, could not bring himself to openly acknowledge. David was dead in the corner. It couldn't be, but it was. He was there and torn terribly apart. It had to have been a bear. A rogue bear? Had broken into the cabin suddenly and attacked the overpowered David and killed him. He had thought, or tried to fight. There was a rifle, a 30-30 in the corner by the body, with the lever pulled open. David had tried to load it, but the bear had come so fast he hadn't time to get a shot off. Perhaps the gun had been in the corner, and the bear had burst in, and David had tried for it, and the bear had gotten to him first. What of the others? There was David's wife, Anne, and the little boy and girl, and Susan. Kate Godash. Oh my God, he thought, oh God, what of them? Where are they? He turned away from David. There would be time later for what was necessary there, and looked through the rest of the trash in the cabin, turning over papers and bags and bunks. There was no other bodies. Outside then, David later. But outside for now. There had to be a sign. He had missed things coming in because he had been nervous. There must be a sign. Tracks. And when he went outside, he was appalled at how much he missed on the way up to the door of the cabin. There, in the soft earth to the side away from the hard-packed trail down to the lake, were clear prints of a bear, a large bear, a huge bear. The prints had to be nearly 6 inches across, and even taking into account the way they spread into the soft earth, the bear had to be over 500 pounds. The tracks coming toward the cabin were far apart and dug in hard, as if the bear had been running to break in. That didn't make sense. And then he saw boot prints as well, running toward the cabin on the same line as the bear, and it made more sense. David had been outside when the bear attacked, and he tried to run to the cabin and get his rifle. Had nearly made it. He had gotten his hands on the rifle and worked the lever, but the bear was chasing him. Was right on him, and after he killed him, had torn the cabin apart. But Anne and Kay Godash, had they been outside as well? The prints leaving the cabin were measured, closer together, and he started after him, and then stopped, thinking of the rifle, and then he shook his head. He is not familiar with firearms and might miss if he ran to a bear. And besides, a broad head was an incredible weapon when it got inside an animal. He turned away, the bow ready, walking slowly, stopped every few feet and listening. Whatever had happened, he thought, had happened. Days before, the condition of David's body and the movement of maggots and the wounds told that. Anne? Suzanne? He called several times but knew better. If they hadn't answered when he first yelled, "Come into the camp," they weren't going to answer now. There had been 2 younger children as well, a small boy and a girl, but he could not remember their names. Surely they weren't dead as well. The kennel. There had to have been 3 or 4 dogs there, not loose but tied with short chains so they wouldn't rip the gear up. And the bear's tracks went out the first back to the kennel, and 3 dogs lay there dead, mauled only slightly. A 4th chain was there with a ripped nylon collar on the end, and he looked back at the dog, which was stiff on him. That was you, and you ran. But why not stay if Anne and Susan were here, or the kids? Unless they were dead. Please no, just please no, not anymore, not now. But to the left of the kennel there were bear tracks, heading off into the brush, and alongside the tracks there was a skid mark, as if the bear had been dragging something heavy. No, please no. It was not hard to follow the tracks, and they didn't go very far. 40 yards back in the brush, he found the second body, partially eaten, the buttocks and the thighs gone, lying on its face, the head hidden by the black hair. the rest of the body covered with leaves and dirt, as a berry to save for later. Please, no. He was sick, but this time he did not throw up, and instead squatted by the head of the body and moved the hair away, and saw that it was Suzanne's mother, Anne. Her face was not torn, but there was a strange angle to her, as though she had been struck very hard, and had broken her neck. He fell back, weak and suddenly, and sat in the grass next to the body. Then he stood and left the body as it was. Time for what he had done had to be done later. When he found out about Suzanne and the other children, and moved back to the cabin, trying not to think about the bodies, this was nearly impossible. He forced his mind to a hunting tracking mode and looked for a sign. The water between the island and the main shore was very shallow, never over a couple feet, and he quickly found where the bear had waded across and come into the island shore. Huge tracks in wet mud, then muddy tracks in the grass, moving through low hazel brush up toward the dogs in the kennel, where the bear must have smelled the dog food, fish, and beaver meat. The odor would carry with good wind for miles. Everything in him wanted to hurry, to run, to scream her name and run. But Brian forced himself to be slow, to be careful. The bear's tracks were even, just walking, never hurrying until the last moment, when he cleared the hazel, and the dog saw him, and probably started barking. There by the kennel he saw the tracks of two people, one large and one slightly smaller. David and Anne, and there was a dented bucket. They were probably feeding the dogs. The distance from the line of hazel brush to where they were standing wasn't 10 yards, 30 yards. 3 bounds for the bear, and he was one of them. 2 seconds warning at the most, and he was there, on top of them. Dogs screaming, one blow for Anne, and Brian could see where her body hit. And David running for the only hope he had. Rifle in the cabin, the bear's prints wheeling, and digging as he went after David and the rest in his cabin. The bear tracks back to the kennel, where he must have killed the dogs. All but one, the one with Brian. And then more tracks, bear tracks, around where Anne's body had fallen. And then the skid marks where the bear had dragged Anne away into the brush to feed. No other new tracks, no small children's tracks. By the kennel, or from kennel to house. No tracks of Suzanne, no newer tracks at all. Maybe she was gone to town, visiting friends or relatives back in the world, gone with the children. He started a circle search around the center of the activity, the attack site and cabin, looping through the brush, close in at first, moving out 4 feet. With each loop, looking intently, studying carefully each stick, each blade of grass, and on the 10th loop he found it, and then felt stupid for not having seen it at once. On the trail up from the lake, just to the side, 2 scuff marks as if somebody walking. Somebody smaller than Brian, smaller than David, had suddenly stopped and then run. Frantically run back to the bank, and there was more skid marks where a canoe had been shoved away from the bank. And here, hidden in the tall grass at odd angles, lay 2 canoe paddles, where they must have fallen from the canoe, when she flipped it over and pushed it into the lake. She had no paddles, must have used her hands. And there at the side more bear tracks, where the bear had run down to the shore, and then moved sideways along the bank, probably following the canoe for a short distance. On the ground by the first scuff mark was a small 2-quart bucket, and scattered around it were raspberries. Susan. No smaller tracks, no children tracks. She had been off in the canoe along with shore picking raspberries, and hadn't been there at the time of the attack. 2 canoes. He shook his head, and winced at his own ignorance. Of course, they had 2 canoes. All the gear and people couldn't travel in one. I'll stop right there.